Nope. Thanks, Polly. Welcome to the Wednesday, January 5th, 2022 virtual meeting on Zoom. Thurston County Planning Commission is a citizens advisory commission to the Board of County Commissioners on land use planning matters such as comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance amendments. Planning Commission actions are in the form of recommendations to the county commissioners, who are the final decision makers. All Planning Commission meetings are open to the public. Citizens are welcome to observe all Planning Commission briefings and work sessions. Public comment is allowed on those topics for which public hearings have not been held. So we're going to start off here with a introductions of our Planning Commission. So Doug.
Doug Carmen, District 2.
Don.
Don DeHaan, District 1.
Scott.
Scott Nelson, District 3.
Eric.
Eric Casino, District 2.
And Kevin.
Kevin Pestinger, District 1.
And I am Jim Simmons, and I represent District 3. So I am going to ask for an approval of the agenda. Is there any corrections or changes or additions?
So move.
And seconded.
Is there anything to add or comments on that? So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we'll be looking for approval of the meeting minutes from December 15th, 2021.
So move.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the meeting minutes of December 15, 2021. Are there any additions or corrections that you guys have noticed or need to be made? Seeing nobody raise their hand or on that. All those in favor of approval of the meeting minutes for December 15th, 2021, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays?
Aye.
Okay, so it's been approved. We have an approval of the meeting minutes for December 15th, 2021. And by the way, good seeing you guys all. Happy New Year, and great to see you all back. So we're going to move to our public communications section. For this virtual meeting, please choose the raise your hand option if you wish to address the Planning Commission. If you are dialing in, press 9 to raise your hand. The chair will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. Make sure you also choose 6 to unmute yourself. You have a 3-minute timer will show on the screen to help keep track of time. If you have issues speaking or being heard, please disconnect from the Zoom meeting and call 360-972-6785 to make your public comment. So you can see the timer there. It's 3 minutes, and it'll go from green to yellow to red. When you're in the yellow, you have 30 seconds left, approximately 30 seconds. Please kind of wrap up what you're speaking with. And I'm not seeing any hands up yet. Is there anybody who'd like to share with us? Oh. Looks like Anne. Sorry. Sorry, Anne, I'm trying to unmute you here, but it's not seeming to work. Can you unmute yourself, Anne?
Hi, Jim. I didn't realize my hand was up. I'm sorry.
Do you have something to share with us?
No, not at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. I'm not seeing any other hands. I saw yours flash for a second. Phyllis, is that, are you looking to say something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Phyllis Farrell, unincorporated Thurston County. Just very briefly, I was struggling to find the link for the meeting tonight. I went into Thurston County Planning Commission website, and the latest meeting agenda was for December 15th. So I went and Googled Thurston County Shorelines and was able to get to it from there. And then also Ann sent me the link. So I might just wanted to let you know that other people might be struggling to find tonight's link if they just went to Thurston County Planning Commission. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Phyllis, for the heads up. We'll look into that. And Mr. Townsend, you're up.
Commissioners, Happy New Year. Patrick Townsend here, Boston Harbor. I don't have comments on the S&P. I think you're probably quite aware of the comments I've made in the past. Just would like to ask that the website that contains drafts of the S&P be current. I checked it a couple of days ago, and maybe it's been updated, but it's the version that was out there was old. So would really like to be able to see the results of the comments that have been made, any changes that the commissioners have made, and get some more current information. So just asking that the site be updated with the latest changes and comments on the S&P. That's all I really have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else that would like to share with us? Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. Going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, we're moving on to the work session for the Shoreline Master Program with Andrew.
All right, thank you, Chair Simmons. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Andrew DeFobis, Interim Senior Planner with Community Planning. So we're here tonight to continue working on the Shoreline Master Program update.
Hey, I'm sorry, Andrew, but just since you're here and while it's still fresh, can you just kind of comment on Mr. Townsend's statement? Or
yes, absolutely. So the Planning Commission, since the public hearing, has been working through comments received, working through the options that were in the draft. Now we're working on comments submitted by planning commissioners, and we've have asked planning commissioners to put in front of staff any of the items that they from public testimony that they want to see us work on. And so we're working through all that. I can certainly update the website to indicate that if it doesn't already say that the Planning Commission is now deliberating based on public comments received. And as for a draft, there has not been a new draft that has been published since the public hearing draft. That's the most recent draft that has been made available. But during these meetings where staff gets requests from Planning Commission to make changes to the document, I am noting them, either on the document or making notes and going back and doing that. But that has not yet resulted in a newly published draft. So that work is ongoing, and I can certainly make sure that the website indicates as such for the public. And also, staff are available if the public have questions, can certainly reach out to me, and I'm happy to go into more detail on that. So tonight we will review comments that were submitted by Commissioner Carmen and were distributed to the Planning Commission ahead of this meeting. We wanted to give the Planning Commission a chance to discuss these written comments and let staff know which ones you as a body want to explore. Some of them have already been addressed by the work the Planning Commission has done since the public hearing. There are some, Commissioner Carmen made some comments on options in the draft, which we spent a couple meetings going through. So those have been addressed one way or the other. So I'll pull up those comments and we'll go through page by page, and I'll just be asking folks, which ones would you like to explore in addition to perhaps things that have already been addressed. So this work that we're doing tonight is in support of the preparing a formal recommendation on the SMP to the Board of County Commissioners. Kevin, I'll pause there because Commissioner Pestinger has his hand raised. Did you have a question?
Hi, this is Kevin. Point of order. Just clarifying whether we might need to change the agenda, or if there's in the last meeting there was a note from the staff that we would get updates about filling of empty positions on the Planning Commission, and I think we have a member of this commission who has an expired term, and I think we're right at being able to meet quorum, and I wonder if we're able to technically meet and make decisions right now.
I'm thinking, is there somebody that's not available for the commission? Is that what you're saying, Kevin? Or somebody that's?
Yeah, I think Commissioner DeHaan's term expired at the end of the year, and I think there's a plan to have the Board of Commissioners appoint some people. Maybe they'll be reappointing him, but if it hasn't happened, I don't know if it's technically a problem for us.
I'm not sure on that. I would have to defer to Chris on that one. I don't think, since we're not voting on anything, maybe at staff updates, we can kind of discuss that and get a better idea of what's going on.
Yeah, I had planned to discuss the commission members' appointments at staff updates.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So we'll get to that before we leave, Kevin. Thank you for the heads up.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, so one last comment before we get started. So I'll be showing the comments on the screen that were submitted by Commissioner Carmen. I do want to apologize to anyone watching at home because I just realized today they are not on the website under today's meeting. However, if anyone watching at home wants to access them on their end, you can do so by going to the November 17th meeting. And for the third attachment under the agenda for the November 17th, 2021 meeting, they are in the written comments received attachment. It starts on page 5 of that document. And I will make sure that the numbered version I'm going to show tonight gets up on the website in the very near future. So apologize for that, but you will be able to see if you're watching your screen at home. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and launch into the comments and then start the discussion. In just a second, I will do that. Bear with me. Okay, there we go. All right. So hopefully you are seeing a PDF text document. It's got Doug Carmen's name at the top. So these are the comments that he submitted, written comments based on public testimony on the SMP. So my plan was just to kind of go page by page and ask folks if there are, as a body, which comments would you like to explore or have staff, look into, bring information back, etc. So on this page, I believe number 3 has already been addressed. That's the non-conforming piece. Staff took the notes from Planning Commission and will be making changes to the document based on that discussion. But I'm curious from folks that are here, if there are questions, comments on any of these additional items or things that you would like to discuss, adding or changing to the document, or would like staff to provide information on or go back and look at anything.
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. Andrew, are you asking specifically about item 3 or about the whole document?
I'm asking about the whole document, but kind of doing it page by page. So you had sent these comments in back in November, but this is the first time that this whole body is having an opportunity to discuss them together. So that's what I was hoping to get tonight is, I know this is a window into what you're thinking about the document, but just want to see what other folks have to say about these and, which items does the Planning Commission as a whole want to pursue.
I know for me, right off the get-go, the number 2, the letter of exemption, I think that it'd be really beneficial if we had a conversation about that still. I understand that the letter of exemption is more to be able to quantify programmatic no net loss, but what are the nuts and bolts of it? How is that going to affect individual property owners that are trying to do work? And I guess just how is that going to be implemented?
Yeah, and I think there's some clarification that needs to happen around the letter of exemption. So just because something is exempt from needing a substantial development permit, it does not automatically mean that it must have a letter of exemption issued. I know that that's been a point of contention or concern among citizens who don't want to have to get a letter for everything and want to know what's that process, what does that cost. State law provides there are a few specific scenarios where a letter must be issued, but we don't have to do it for every single item. And so this is one of the ongoing conversations that I am having with our current planning folks when it comes to how this document is going to be administered, and doing a walk across of all the different types of projects you can think of in the shoreline and what is the permitting outcome, right? What, making sure that it's clear what, if any, permits are needed, and if a permit is not needed, in which instances is a letter of exemption required. So there's certainly going to be more to come on that, but I'm hoping that is clarified in the next version of the draft. And if a letter of exemption is not going to be required, then what does approval from the county look like? How is that structured?
So are we going to have a definition for it? I mean, we've talked about it throughout the whole document, but I've never seen anything written down as to what it is or what it's for and all that. So I would think we'd want to start with a definition, and then you can do your other clarification throughout the document.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that personally. I'm certainly of the mind that if it's something that is used throughout the document, it doesn't hurt to have a definition. We want to avoid definitions for things that don't ever appear anywhere else, but certainly the letter of exemption is used throughout the document. So I would support that if that's something the Planning Commission would like to see happen in this document.
Yeah, I'd like to see a definition for that too. And this might not be the appropriate conversation for this, but I still think that I would like to see something in there that if the only issue somebody had was a lack of a letter of exemption, but everything else about their project was fine, that the lack of letter of exemption in and of itself is not actionable for anything. They're not going to get fines. They're not going to have to do weird mitigations. They're not going to have to pull out projects or anything like that. I don't want to penalize people for a lack of a letter of exemption just because there is such a confounding thing. Yeah.
And there is another section, and so perhaps more conversation is necessary, or more thinking on my part about how this, exactly how it's all going to work. But there is another section of the draft that says that, written approval is required before a project can happen. And so that doesn't necessarily have to be a letter of exemption. It doesn't have to be a permit, but as written, the draft does state that written approval is required. And so that could potentially be something that comes from, it's a condition on, other permits that someone needs for a project, or it's just or in those instances where they don't need anything else, any other, necessarily approvals, then maybe it's just an email or a letter, just a letter, from staff, and that gets put in the file and is available in our permit system. So, but yeah, I mean, there is that is in the draft about written approval, but it doesn't always have to be a letter of exemption.
Then what about item 1?
1 sec, let me make this note and then we'll go to that. Okay, so item 1 here is talking about critical areas and shorelines. So I'm not recalling the conversation with Brad 3 years ago. I may have been in the room, I may not have been. But my understanding of critical areas and shorelines is that state law says that you have to protect critical areas and shorelines. You have to have a level of protection in your SMP that is as protective as your critical areas ordinance. And there are a variety of ways that jurisdictions can go about addressing critical areas in their shorelines. The way that Thurston County has done that with this update is to reference the critical area protections as an appendix to the Shoreline Master Program document. And so that language there in, and I know you made a comment, I think further down in here. So in chapter 19-400, there's some general preamble about critical areas that kind of sets the scene for that and provides context. And then all of the relevant provisions from the critical areas ordinance that will apply have been encapsulated in Appendix E of the document. So it's not necessarily that we are, putting the whole ordinance in that, but critical area protections are largely going to live in that Appendix E.
What Brad said is that whatever we put in the SMP, if it's different than the CAO, that you would then have to go back and change the CAO, whether we're more restrictive or less restrictive.
Well, we're not changing the critical areas ordinance as part of this update. That's not part of this work plan.
I understand, but if we had something less or more restrictive, then you would have to go back and do that. That's what he told us.
I don't know that we would necessarily have to change it, but perhaps it could be that maybe the thought was in shoreline jurisdiction that whatever's in the SMP would apply instead. And I think that may be true in some instances where you have some of these shorelines that are kind of doing double duty, right? So a stream buffer is technically, a riparian area that is a critical area, but that is also one of the three, a stream is also one of the three specific shoreline types, covered by the Shoreline Management Act. And so it's a critical area, but it's also explicitly a shoreline. And the rules may be different, and the act and the Shoreline Master Program is specifically creating rules for those areas versus, the buffers on a wetland that happen to be associated with a shoreline feature. So there may be, and I've run into that too, because, when you look at it, there are development standards in the SMP that deal with lake shorelines or well, not lakes, but let's just say marine shorelines or streams. And then there are development standards for those same riparian areas in the critical areas ordinance. And I think in those specific instances, the development standards in the SMP are going to rule. But if any of those are less protective than what we currently do through our critical areas ordinance, that may be where we run into issues with ecology. But the development standards for other things, floodplains or for wetlands, all those types of things will continue to apply. And that's where the Appendix E piece comes in. So I know it's very
confusing.
I know it is.
Because the CAO definitely gives the responsibility of shorelines to the SMP. Clearly separated it out and moved it over to the SMP.
It does in some places. Yes, it does do that. For example, when we did the update for the critical areas ordinance in 2012, it did not put new regulations on lakes. As far as I know, that was continued to be in the SMP. However, lakes with wetland fringe, you have wetland, floating wetlands with those lakes. Those are today and will always be regulated by the standards for wetlands in the CAO. So it is very confusing. And they overlap, but I lost the thread there. But the critical areas within shoreline jurisdiction are to be protected by standards that are as protective as what your critical areas ordinance does. And so the way that we attempted to do that was by moving over that language where it's relevant and taking out things that are not relevant. So one of the things when I drafted that section in 19400, that preamble language was to try to explain how this all works. There are certain mechanisms in the critical areas ordinance that will no longer apply because state law is very prescriptive that shoreline permitting within shoreline jurisdiction, even in your critical areas, is to be handled through the SMP. So there will be no more critical area permits. There will be no more reasonable use exceptions. These things are all being replaced by mechanisms that operate under the Shoreline Management Act instead. So.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. And just so you know, Commissioner Carmen, some of these things that are very clearly just should be fixed because they're not correct. I've made note of that. So your number 6 here, for example, that's a quick fix I can make. That's just an error in the table name. So anything like that, just know that I have.
And that should be 107C, I believe, not B. B
okay.
should be stream, C is for lakes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, great. I did find it. I did find the section in the document where it needs to be fixed though, so
Well, I just put in everything that I saw, typos and everything, so.
appreciate it. Yeah. Okay.
The overwater structures.
Mhm.
The legislator defined overwater structures in 20,000 or 2011 as houseboats. They did not define it as piers or docks as in our document.
The legislature, they made specific provisions for floating overwater residences, and made sure that's one of the pieces of the periodic update, that jurisdictions must include language that addresses those in their document. And our draft does do that. This specific definition is meant to be a general catch-all for any type of overwater structure. So it's not, it goes beyond that. And if you look at the, the SMP handbook, for example, they've got a chapter on piers, docks, and overwater structures. So anything that is over, it's waterward of the ordinary high water mark and is elevated above the water surface is technically an overwater structure. And so this is an intent to have a definition that refers to those collectively. So I don't know, if we want to talk about, and let me pull it up or scroll to it. I can read it out for Planning Commission. The structure built or placed on or over the water. Some examples include recreational piers, docks and floats, platforms and floats used for aquaculture, boathouses and residences. Water-oriented commercial and industrial uses may also have overwater structures. So the draft SMP, throughout the draft, it makes reference to these and whether, in which environments they should be allowed, and then as they pertain to, or how development standards pertain to these specific structures. So this definition is intended to, if anyone's reading this document and says, what is an overwater structure? What would that be? That's what this is intended to point them to if they look that up. I don't know if there are further comments or questions on that specific one. And if not, are there additional pieces here on page 1 that folks would like to look at?
We need to, with the setback, where we've talked about eliminating that 15-foot setback. Mm-hmm. And I think we agreed to do it, as I recall. Do we still need a definition here?
Yeah, hang on. Let me get there, and I will go ahead and pull this one up.
You're talking about number 20, Doug?
Number 5.
Number 5.
So that language, it is still in the draft, and the way that it was left after the last, what came through this discussion with Planning Commission and then made it into the public hearing draft was I think a tweak to the language about, that it may not always apply, but the setback was left in there. So give me a sec and I will see if I can find it.
Well, I mean, that's okay. If we still need the definition, that's fine.
I think so. I think so, because the language that talks about construction setbacks still does make provision for a setback. What was changed here was that there's a statement that says the setback may be reduced or waived by the approval authority, provided that the resulting setback is protective of existing vegetation within the buffer. So essentially that it can be case by case, and if there's mitigating circumstances or the type of method of construction is not going to pose an issue, that that setback can be waived. And because of that, though, it could also not be waived. And so we want to have a definition for what setback means. Okay.
I was confused about urban conservancy, 200, 120. I mean, in reading through it, it doesn't, I just got confused reading it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it needs to be revised in order to.
So the description of urban conservancy environment and the designation criteria do come out of the WAC, or are largely influenced by the WAC. So that same language that you quoted in there about generally not suited for water dependent uses is in the WAC. And so I went and looked at that today. And if you ask me, I would say because the intent of that environment is to preserve ecological function in those areas where it does exist in more developed settings, that's why those areas would not be considered suitable for water dependent uses. So things that would alter shoreline modifications, for the sake of water dependent use, versus an area that is developed, but the shoreland area is also impacted, right? That might be something that is more likely to get a designation of shoreline residential, and therefore this language, or high intensity or something, whatever the case might be. But this specifically urban conservancy is intended to be, you've got intact shoreline vegetation and area within a developed area, trying to keep that there and keep that character. And so hopefully if you have an area that's developed and does not have that intact area, hopefully it became something else, because this is,
If that's what the WAC says, we can't change it anyway. It is confusing to me.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, our designation system is based on the WAC. If it's not clear, it's certainly something we could look at making more clear. But that's my read on it, is that if the intent is to preserve the ecological function in an intact area, that's why water dependent uses would not be suitable. But yes, that language did come originally from the WAC.
If nobody else has problems with it, we can move on.
Okay.
On policy SH5, we've kind of talked about this before, in that we need to provide for people who aren't able to walk down these paths. They need a wheelchair, or they have crutches or whatever, and having irregular dirt trails can be hazardous to them. And I think we should allow for pervious paving to accommodate the handicap on these trails. So something in the policy to allow that. The goal is to increase public access to publicly owned lands. And in here, it doesn't say you can't, but later on it does.
Are you all seeing the Word document now, the S&P?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to try to switch back and forth. It's kind of like driving stick. It's a little non-intuitive for me. So if it gets annoying, let me know. But I do want us to try to be able to look at some of these languages while we're talking about them, language sections. So policy SH5. Yeah, so number, okay, where is it?
SH5.
Number 2. Okay, yes. So number 2 is saying, yeah, prioritize developing unpaved pervious paths and trails to shoreline areas where appropriate. And you're saying, add pervious pavement in here as well. This is all, this is at high level policy. I don't have a problem making that change, simply because if there is some concern for some specific project where that would not be appropriate, one, this policy already states where appropriate, so it provides a sideboard, and 2, the project is going to have to demonstrate no net loss. So adding that language here shouldn't hurt anything, I don't think.
No, and it opens it up so that someone who's designing that at least can propose it and gives them the options.
I agree with Doug with adding in that flexibility.
Okay. What do other folks think? Is there any concern about adding that? If not, I'm happy to make that change. Okay. All right. I will go ahead and do that. And I'll flip us back. Okay. Oh, well, that's not going to work. Okay. What's next on page 1 here? Page 1 goes down through number 13.
And 9, I'm okay. That one can be deleted.
Okay.
SH15, though, if shading of the shoreline is beneficial, then why is the shading provided by a pier or a float not beneficial?
Mhm. It's more, yeah, a policy question, or well, just a question. My sense of that is that yes, shading of the shoreline is beneficial when it's done by trees. That's helping to control the water temperature in addition to providing leaf matter and other organic compounds into the water. It provides a source of large woody debris for the shoreline, but it also does allow for light transmission differently than something that is placed directly over the water, like a pier or a dock. So if you have trees or bushes or something over the water, depending on where the sun is at, there's still going to be light that's getting through, versus something that's on the water and flat over it. That's my sense of why we would make that distinction.
Yeah, it's not intuitive though. That's the problem, is it tells me that someone doesn't want piers and docks just because they're piers and docks. It's not really scientifically justified. Because I don't see the science that makes a difference between the two. And if you're on a eutrophic lake, you don't want those leaves and branches and crap going into the lake either, because it increases the eutrophication of the lake, which is counter to the needs of the county.
Right. And I'm not sure that all of the state guidelines on the ecological functions that are provided by the different water bodies, they don't make that distinction. And we've had that conversation too.
Yeah. That's the problem, is they make the statement that lake is the same as all lakes are the same, and lakes are the same as the marine environment, which is not true. So making that assumption is an erroneous assumption.
So I pulled this policy up. Was there a specific spot that talked about shade? I'm trying to see it, because if there's a clarification we could make.
I don't know how you can do it in here. I mean, I'm just trying to make an observation of the difference between vegetation overhang and a dock overhang, and that this policy doesn't, unless you add a different policy, which would be counter to the other sections of the code, the way it's written, because the people who don't want docks have gotten it written in there. So I guess my question is more a philosophical question than it is something that we can actually change.
Yeah.
And it's something we all should realize, that this is this is two different political opinions, and it really is politics.
Well, I mean, there is scientific literature that talks about, all of the ecological functions provided by riparian vegetation and the impacts that are provided by shoreline modifications. So, we can, and that's all going to be part of the record of this project, right?
Sure.
So,
and I agree with that, but it's for rivers. It's primarily a function of rivers or feeder banks in the marine environment, but in a lake, it's different.
But they still have function that we need to protect through this document. And I think you're right. It is philosophical, and it is not something we're certainly not going to solve it this evening.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on. Is there another one on this page that folks would like to discuss?
Policy SH16. As I've stated in the past, it's extremely difficult to purchase native plants because nurseries don't have them, number one. Number two, the state and the county plants non-native plants all the time. What is a rhododendron? Is it a native plant? There's a wild rhododendron, which is native, but nobody plants that. They plant a hybrid. So would they not be allowed to plant a beautiful red rhododendron?
So I think there could be potentially a change to this language to not necessarily prohibit non-native vegetation or make it, the boogeyman, right? I've had some conversations about this with the Thurston Conservation District and other folks about this. And native vegetation is going to be preferred simply because it's the use of species that have evolved here. They are, well suited here, and they are just plugged into the overall ecosystem with, benefits that have been here long before any of us have been here, right? It's just how the system evolved. That being said, that does not mean that there are not non-native. It doesn't mean that there aren't other species out there that are not native to this area that don't provide some of those benefits. And so perhaps it's appropriate to allow for that flexibility. And again, here we're talking at a policy level, broad steering policies of the SMP. And so I could see that last sentence there saying something like, native vegetation is encouraged, but non-native may be used if it provides the same function, and maybe there's some appropriate sideboards to look at for that. We prefer native vegetation, but recognize that non-native plays a role, in mitigation.
That would be fine with me.
Isn't the primary objective to avoid any kind of invasive?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a difference between non-native and invasive, and under no circumstances would we condone the planting of invasive vegetation, but something that is non-native but doesn't go crazy, that would be potentially allowable. So in looking at this, I think there's other parts of the draft where we might want to look at that, but I don't have a problem with that personally. So if that's something, if the Planning Commission wants me to kind of change that language as I suggested, essentially that, native is preferred, but non-native may be used if it provides the function, I can make that change.
I like that.
Okay. All right. Okay. Great. Okay. And we're back here on page 1 of the Commissioner Carmen's notes. So number 12 or number 13, anything?
Policy 21.7, I'm suggesting that we insert the stormwater outfalls and stormwater drainage from roadways into, let me get the page.
I've got it here. So it's, okay, I've got it pulled up. So adding the phrase "and stormwater drainage from roadways" into this first, like right there.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, again, these are policy statements. This is not regulation. We're not mandating that because I don't think we necessarily can. So I'm okay with that. I mean, we're seeking to avoid in the introduction of untreated stormwater into our shoreline areas, and that makes sense to me.
Well, I'm assuming that these high-level policy things are supposed to translate into actual stuff in the rest of the document.
Right.
And in this case with the stormwater, there's a big issues made about how shorelines are degraded because of the stormwater running down somebody's front yard into the water, which is debatable, but it can take contaminants with them. But when you take water running directly off of a roadway into the creek that goes into the lake or the river or the marine environment, that's taking a heck of a lot more pollutants into that water body than any water that would run across your front yard.
Mm-hmm.
And
Andrew,
so,
and maybe just to back up a second, Andrew, would you inform us how a policy would actually be actionable on a specific project?
So the policies themselves may not necessarily be actionable, but Commissioner Carmen is correct. You know, what's written here should, you know, filter down into the development standards that are elsewhere in the document. And so, but what I'm saying is, you know, outfalls that are already there and roads that are already draining to lakes, you know, this document is not going to change those things. It's not necessarily going to change things that are outside of shoreline jurisdiction. So, but, you know, potentially new projects that are within shoreline jurisdiction absolutely can and should be designed to, you know, mitigate all of their impacts to shoreline ecological functions, you know, stormwater being one of those. So there is an area where, you know, we county can create policy, you know, and govern these projects, but, you know, things that are already out there and happening or outside of jurisdiction, it's not going to apply. So new construction within shoreline jurisdiction, absolutely.
Or remodel, rebuild.
Yes, yeah, sure, yep. So yeah, that being said, I mean, I don't have an objection to what he opposed or proposed, if you know, Planning Commission wants to see that language changed.
We have heads that are nodding, or
I'm okay with that. I mean, I would like to see more of our street runoffs being treated, and so anything we can do to keep some of that roads grime out of the waterways, even at a policy level, which is not very actionable, and we might not even see any real results from it for years on end. I think having that in there, so at least we're moving that direction, is a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So the last thing on page 1 here, so there was a question about the goal of reducing the use of plastics in aquaculture. It was not added specifically to the aquaculture section. It was actually added into policy number 10, which is a general policy about all shoreline uses. So it's not just aquaculture. This document is encouraging limiting the use of plastics everywhere. So not just aquaculture. So that's how that got addressed.
Okay.
All right. So I'm gonna move into page 2. Is there anything here that jumped out at Planning Commission that you'd like to discuss?
Well, of course, I want to discuss every single one of them. So.
Yep.
Or I wouldn't have written them.
Right. But yeah, so that's why I was kind of hoping that one way to, you know, ensure that what we're talking about has the support of the whole Planning Commission is to have planning commissioners, other planning commissioners, you know, point to the ones that they are interested in pursuing. That was my thought.
I think that we might have already settled this issue, but number 16, where we're calling lawfully established existing development conforming.
Yes, 16 has been addressed, or, you know, will be. I took your comments on that at a previous work session.
Okay.
Number 19 also, I off the top of my head can't remember exactly where you all landed, but we've as a body, you have addressed buffers. I can point out one of the questions here that Commissioner Carmen had about buffers for rivers. They are in the document below. They're directly below the table that has the buffers for marine and lakes. It's just a couple sentences. It's not a table.
I found that later after I wrote this.
Great. And then the last piece there on number 19, we can just sew that right up. So there was a comment there about setback requirements or buffer requirements for agriculture. Just know that we're working on some language for options for that, just around the conversation that you all had and that conversation that I've had with Chris and others about just making sure that, you know, it's not necessarily a one size fits all buffer that needs to apply here. You really need to look at the existing condition of the ground. You need to look at the nature of the operation and see, you know, what are the impacts that are proposed and, you know, what is appropriate and necessary in each case. So we're working on some language around that.
And 21's been taken care of.
Yeah.
And
21 and 22. the last half of number 21, I think we'd have to look at that piece, the mitigation, that has not been addressed. And that might be, I know you had some other questions about Appendix B, so that might be, we might want to hold off on that till we get there.
Okay.
So that being said, yeah, there's a couple here on this page that have been addressed. Are there others that folks are interested in taking up?
Well, policy 53, I suggest that you add C4. It should be designed in a way to prevent stormwater from entering the aquifer, inlet, outlet, or water body without first entering a settling pond designed. So it's in line with what we discussed in back a couple of policies ago.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, and you know, we'll devil's in the details, and we'll see if there are comments or tweaks that need to happen on that based, you know, on review of our public works folks. But at a high level, you know, I don't have a problem with that. So if that's, again, this is policy number 53, and you can see there are 3 pieces to that, and the question is adding one that says they should be designed in a way to prevent stormwater from entering the aquifer, inlet, outlet, or water body without first entering a settling pond designed to filter out pollutants, solids, and nutrients. I think we, you know, I'm certainly game to add that and see where that goes.
And then item 15 is a general comment. With the increase in population in the county, more and more housing developments are paving over the ground, and so there's more and more stormwater that's going into rivers, lakes, and marine environment. And the SMP allows us to have jurisdiction further than 200 feet if we deem it necessary to protect the shorelines. And so my suggestion here is that from a stormwater handling standpoint, that we extend that to 1,000 feet. I just picked 1,000 feet in order to get a ways away from the water body, but you have housing developments that could be a mile away that dump water right into a little creek that goes right into the river or the sound, or so it's my opinion that we should extend further when we're talking about stormwater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not recalling. Oh, sorry. Did I cut someone off? Did someone? No. Okay. I'm not recalling the specific language. It's ringing a bell what you're talking about in terms of going beyond shoreline jurisdiction, but I don't know that it is a you know, a mandate, or that, you know, we have the ability to do that with, you know, require something outside of shoreline jurisdiction. You know, we have the ability to kind of morph shoreline jurisdiction and pull in areas that are associated with shoreline. So for example, you know, the buffers associated with critical areas, we can bring into shoreline jurisdiction, and we've done that in this document. But and I know what you're talking, there's something in the handbook about it, but I think it might be more at the policy or the encouraged, you know, kind of encouraged, counties are encouraged to think outside of these areas. But when it comes to writing regulations for development, I'm not sure we can go outside of shoreline jurisdiction. So I was kind of curious, that's why I was curious to hear your thoughts on this comment, because I wasn't.
Well, I have my notes somewhere. It's in the handbook. It's in the ecology handbook.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about, I don't have it right in front of me. I've got too many piles of paper. But it stated something like, if there is situations or areas outside of the 200 foot that impacts shoreline ecological function, that we can, this document can include it in the requirements or regulations.
So that might be one that I then would go back and yeah, if you find that at some point and want to forward it to me, that'd be great. I I have some thoughts on where I can look for that. I think I can find it, but if that's something Planning Commission would like me to look into and come back with more information, I'm happy to do so. So I'll look to you all to see if you want me to explore this concept more, or yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think 1,000 feet's a long ways away. And I also think that between our current drainage manual and what's going on here, I think you're going to be hard pressed for anything new. I mean, obviously there's stuff that does it now, but I think you're going to be hard pressed for anything new to actually dump water directly into a shoreline environment.
Well,
And also,
the
there are
problem is the shoreline, the stormwater regs require a catch basin, so you can dump stormwater into a huge dry well. And the intent is to have it hold water long enough so that the solids settle out, and then it will overflow into the river, stream, lake, or whatever. The problem is the chemicals that are in that water don't settle out. They're in the water, they're dissolved. And so you're putting phosphates, which causes toxic algae blooms. You're putting in PCPs and other petrochemicals that'll go right into the water body. So what I'm saying is the stormwater specs are not adequate for protecting the ecological function of a shoreline. And so we need to be more restrictive on that so that we can keep those chemicals out of our water bodies. 75%, I've got here, I'm reading right from the Stream Team, which is government funded organization. It says approximately 75% of all the pollution in our water bodies, in Puget Sound specifically, is carried there by stormwater runoff. 75%. And we're worrying about a few little things that a homeowner might do to their property. When stormwater is the major culprit. So that's my point, is that we need to address some of the major things and not all the minor stuff.
So I hear what you're saying, Doug, and I totally agree with that, but I guess I'm trying to figure out what is a safe distance away. 1,000 feet seems like a long ways to me.
It could be. As I said, I picked 1,000 feet just to pick a number.
Yeah, okay, so maybe that's what we need to do, is find out what is a safe distance and then kind of come back to this. I'm on a little bit of the side, you know, I don't want to be more restrictive if I don't have to be. But I know there's a line there somewhere where we need to be, but I mean, I'm thinking about this guy out there in the county trying to rebuild his house, or even myself. If I want to rebuild my house and I got to do all this extra stuff, the cost, well, I shouldn't say, you know, I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to be less restrictive if we can.
And I agree with you, Jim, but we are already requiring the homeowner who's building a house to do all of these things. The homeowner has to provide for his downspout drainage and not going into the lake. And the homeowner has to make sure that the runoff from their property isn't going into the lake. And the homeowner has to do this and the homeowner has to do that. But all of the other county residents who dump their stuff in the street that then drains downhill into the lake ought to have to control their stormwater also. That's my point.
Okay.
And whether it's 1,000 feet, I don't know, 500 feet, 200 feet. But I'm just thinking of the housing developments behind me, you know, or behind you, or behind anybody that aren't on the water body, but where's their water going? Downhill to that water body.
I think a good approach might be to have me go back and find that language that Commissioner Carmen's referring to, or if you find it, please feel free to email it to me.
Yeah, I will. I'll find it. I was just going through the handbook here.
Yeah, and we'll bring that back because I think it's really we need to know, or you need to know what your lanes are in terms of, you know, recommending policy. And if there's no room to run there outside of shoreline jurisdiction, I mean, that's kind of the end of it. So let's put a pin in that one and circle back. Okay. So as we said, number 16 was covered. So we'll move on from 17 and down. If folks have anything on this page they would like to discuss, now's the time.
The only thing, I think all the rest of them are pretty well covered. The 400, 100A3. Why state that a cup may be required? We've already done forward. Later on in the document, we say it's not. So.
Yeah, hang on. Let me find the right thing I'm trying to find here. So that language is specifically talking about existing, it's the general language that would apply to existing uses in shoreline jurisdiction if you're trying to do something new to that existing, to an existing use. And I did find it, so bear with me. Okay, so letter A here, existing uses, A3. Conditional use permits exist to provide flexibility for things. They exist to provide flexibility for the county to consider a project that isn't necessarily totally included in the SMP or otherwise described. It enables us to, it's the permit we would issue for something that doesn't necessarily have black and white development standards specifically for that use, but it, you know, the conditional use permit process enables the county to examine what the impacts would be and assign appropriate conditions in the conditional use permit to mitigate those impacts. So it is appropriate to consider that a conditional use permit could be applied to a change in use. I think another thing that could be appropriate here would be to also state a variance. So conditional use permit or a variance. I mean, these are the tools that we have to say, if you're proposing a project that is not described in the SMP, or you are not able to meet, you know, your project doesn't meet the parameters of, you know, that the SMP would allow administratively, those are the two tools that exist. It's the conditional use permit and the variance. So, you know, this section does continue to go on and provide additional context for that conditional use permit. So I don't know if that helps at all. But, you know, that was my thought when I looked at your comments and then looked at this section again and what it's trying to say.
Well, it says if any change that conforms to the standard still might require a cup.
Mm-hmm.
It might require an SUP, SDP. It might require a variance. It might require, it might require all kinds of different things. Mm-hmm. Why are we specifically saying a cup? Yeah.
And I will lean back on the fact that I did not write this sentence, so I can't tell you exactly why, but, you know, I think, you know, we could certainly look into it because you're right. It's not just a conditional use permit that could be required. That might be something I want to ask Brad about, his thinking in that piece, or that might have come from his discussions with current planning. I'm not sure, but this is one that, you know, if Planning Commission would like me to go back, do some research, provide some context on this, or propose some alternate language that is more clear, I would be happy to do so. So I see Eric is nodding and Jim. Okay, great. So number 17. Okay. All right. Great. Okay. Hopefully I can read that chicken scratch in the morning. Okay, so number 18, I think we sort of discussed. Number 19, we discussed. Number 20, yes. Yeah, so my notes that I wrote on that number 20 was that the language that is in that section reflects past guidance from the Planning Commission. 21 and 22, I think, have been asked and answered at previous work sessions. We'll move into number 23, or excuse me, page 3, which contains number 23 and many others. So what issues or questions do folks have about the items on page 3?
I'm trying to find the page in the book right now.
On page 3, my biggest concern is my biggest disagreement with Doug would be on 31. I understand his reasoning there, but I am not prepared to tell farmers that they can't graze out that direction, and I don't think we could even tell them that if we wanted to.
So yeah, and I would loop back to my previous comments on the buffer piece above, where we're working on that language, and so I think there will be something to react to in the next version of the draft. So if we can hold off on that one. And then number 32, just because it's right there and a related topic. So Commissioner Carmen, you made the comment that, if you're expanding agriculture on existing ag land, that you should be required to comply with vegetation conservation standards. And in this instance, this is not something that we can change. So this is a state law that preempts new regulations on agriculture on existing land. So that's why that section's written the way it is, to reflect that, ag land, that is ag land. We're not putting new restrictions on that, and we can encourage them to comply with the buffer standards, but we cannot require it.
Yeah, and we handled that last week, or last meeting.
Okay, great. All right, so that knocks that one out. Others on this page.
Still trying to find 120 D4C.
I'm going to pull it up on my end. So this, I believe, relates to hazard trees. Yeah, okay. Okay, I've got it up if you want to, you can share your thoughts there. So you had a question or comment about leaving the fallen tree within the buffer area. And so that is, hang on a sec. So yeah, that is done, because that fallen tree still provides ecological function. It still provides wildlife habitat. And I believe the critical areas ordinance also requires that. And that's just kind of standard practice unless there is some, big mitigating concern. So if that tree was diseased, for example, and had something that could spread, you could potentially take that out of there. But if it's just, it needs to be taken down before it falls down and causes harm, we would prefer to see that left there to provide that habitat.
Well, this doesn't say preferred, it says you have to. So what this tells me, that if a tree falls down in my front yard between the house and the lake, or I cut it down because it's going to fall down, that I have to leave it there. I can guarantee you nobody's going to leave it there, so why write it into the spec? Is that my interpretation correct?
I mean, yes, and I think that is already what we require today in the critical areas ordinance. So I don't have, I field phone calls about hazard trees, but I have not talked to staff to see exactly how this piece is administered. And I don't know if through consultation with the state, if they're, if they have some means of some sort of checklist or, flow chart that says in these circumstances we would leave it and in other circumstances we would not. So I don't have a whole lot of information on the background of it. I know that this is something that is already required.
I'll need the documentation, because this thing is, that statement is, number one, nobody's going to abide by it. So the trees are just going to disappear. So why require it? Why have a stump there? I mean, it's dangerous. It's a safety hazard. Can we sue the state because they made us leave the tree there? I mean, that's a ridiculous statement, but I mean, in reality, that's the case.
And I think if there is a safety, a documented or legitimate safety issue, potentially that would be a mitigating circumstance where we wouldn't have to require that. And so maybe that's where there's room in here to add some language about that or something like that. I think, if it's far enough away from the house, well, actually, no, if it's far enough away from the house that it's not going to fall and hit it, it's not a hazard tree. So I don't know. We could think more about that one, I guess, or think about putting some sideboards on that. But, obviously if there is a immediate concern, human health and safety, that's going to carry the day.
Well, any tree in most front yards on a water body are going to be a hazard tree, because if they fall, they can fall towards the house. And any kind of tree of any substance is going to hit the house or the dock or something else. So I need to know what that's all about. So
Andy, I would like to relook at the wording for 4A there, because it says balance protection of the critical area or shoreline buffer with protection of life and property. And I don't think that there's ever a case where you can balance critical areas with life. I think life is always going to be number one, and there's no balancing act there. We have to protect life at all costs, including critical areas and a tree falling over.
Yeah. I think what that is meaning to say is that, if you don't need to take the whole thing and a portion of it does not need to be removed, leave the portion that is, healthy and is not in immediate danger of falling over. But it doesn't say that. It says what it says. So I understand your point.
Most of these times, are we going to require an arborist still, or is this something that a layman is going to be able to determine the emergency on?
We have the ability to require an arborist. I don't know how often our planners do that. I know many times, well, I shouldn't say many times, but anecdotally, I know that we don't necessarily require people to jump through a whole lot of hoops. They can take pictures and show it to us, and potentially they can issue approval that way. But I'm not sure how often an arborist, this gives us the ability to hire one, but we don't have to do it in every case. And I wouldn't think we would want to unless it was deemed necessary.
From the practical application, do people ever actually ask for permission to take out hazard trees, or does this usually come to the county's attention after someone's taken it out and it's complaint driven?
It's both. We absolutely we field calls about trees and hazard trees frequently. I don't even work on that stuff, and I get those calls frequently. So I know our planners are getting them often.
I know for us on our farm, hazard trees are usually trees that a neighbor thinks is going to fall on their house. So they call the county and say, hey, this guy has this tree. Then we have to call our forester, who is an arborist. He comes in and basically my opinion is he doesn't want to take the risk. So he says, yes, it's a hazard tree, and we cut it down.
Yeah. So this one, it might be good for me to get some more information about how, this is implemented, and also, see what I can pull up about leaving that tree for habitat and how that's implemented, how that works. Maybe talk to the state as well.
If that tree did fall over and say it was partially in the water and partially on somebody's dock, would they not be allowed to cut it up off their dock too then?
I
Or
think they,
repair their dock if it got smashed?
I mean, I believe they would be. You know, I don't think we're gonna say your dock is now a tree storage. I don't know, but I think about, you know, when you're hiking, when you go on a hike, and you come to an area where the tree has fallen across the trail, and you know they cut it wide enough that you can keep going, and you'll often, if you look, you'll see the rounds and all the tree debris kind of chucked over on the side, and it's left there for habitat. You know, it's not trucked out, it's not removed because it's still providing function. You know, I understand that a backcountry trail is not the same as your front yard, but you know, that's where this is kind of coming from. It's a part of that system. It's still providing benefits. So, you know, we'd want to see that there. But there may be circumstances where that's maybe not appropriate. So
it brings up another point. What's the difference between that tree sitting on top of the water floating and a dock?
mhm.
Fish and Wildlife wants the tree, but they don't want the dock.
Yeah, well,
And science is the same either way.
I think we're going to agree to disagree on that one. Okay. Let me go back to the comments here. I think we talked about number 24. Well, just that I'm going to come back and give you some more information on that. Oh, maybe not actually. Doug, if you wanted to tee that one up, go ahead.
Well, that's again, this is another section of the document that talks about water quality and stormwater is a major function of water quality. It's a big contributor to that. And that's my point. 75% of the pollutants in the water comes from stormwater. So in this section, because it's water quality, shouldn't we talk something about what impacts water quality? And bring in some of the wordage from 21.7, policy 21.7.
So this section of the doc, well, let me switch over here. So 19,400, 125, you know, this is pointing to how stormwater is going to be managed for new development or redevelopment where appropriate or where necessary. And it's largely just as Scott kind of referred to, it's pointing us to other sections of the code that already address these pieces. So these are things that if you're building something, you know, whether you're in shoreline or not, these are the rules that would apply to that project. So this is connecting those dots and saying, in addition to shoreline review, you know, we're going to be looking at, you know, Title 21, 2, 3, you know, for the development standards, depending on what zone you're in, for impervious surface limits, and then also, you know, how your stormwater is going to be managed, best management practices, all those sorts of things. So all this stuff is going to apply, you know, whether or not it was written here, it certainly applies. But so this is where you're saying though, you know, in addition to what the county already requires through its drainage design and erosion control manual and the county code, looking at additional restrictions on development related to, or not additional provisions for handling stormwater.
Right. So you just in this section, you'd refer to policy SH 21.7.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it could certainly do that. I don't know how. I'm curious how those mesh, and is there going to be inconsistency between them? And again, on something that we county can't necessarily change, because these are going to be requirements anyway. So I'm not sure I'm not sure that policy is necessarily appropriate here.
Well, my concern here is that water quality is water quality. Quality has to do with not having pollutants in it.
Yeah.
You have the purest water you can have is what we should have, which we don't because we've done a lot of stuff to it. But we ought to put something in here that actually does something about water quality, and that's eliminating the pollutants that we're putting in it through stormwater. It's costing lake management districts a ton of money to get rid of the phosphorus that stormwater is dumping in the lakes. And it's turning to blue-green algae, which is toxic.
So, and I'm not, again, I don't know that putting the policy here is it's not necessarily going to change the implementation of these other codes that are outside of the Shoreline Master Program.
Well, I don't imagine it would either, unless it impacts a shoreline jurisdiction water body. And then they have to comply to the SMP, which requires them to do certain things.
I also, without looking and scanning through the document, I'm not sure in how many other sections do we, the policies are in the previous chapter and they're self-contained there. I don't know how often we refer back to those, as the draft continues on. So could we do it? Sure. I'm just not sure how relevant that would be, but I'm gonna, leave that to the Planning Commission to think about.
Well, Andrew, for you, one of the questions I would ask, because the comment says that according to the stream team, 75% of the pollution is caused by stormwater. But my guess is that most of that probably predates the Shoreline Management Act. And our job is no net loss. And I agree we need to do more to clean it up, but in shorelines, I don't know that we need to go back and, like if you've got, take I-5 running through downtown or the south end of the Tumwater. If stormwater comes off of that onto Capitol Lake, that's something I don't know that would affect our no net loss of ecological gains, because that's obviously from well before shoreline management.
And you can certainly bet that when that section of I-5 gets redone, that the new stormwater standards will apply from the state. So yeah, over time, those existing uses would get, the newest rules would be applied. So.
Well, Scott, you're right. The 75% could be old data, but it's printed in the June, July, August 2021 edition of the Stream Team News. So it's current.
Well, I'm not saying it's old data. I'm saying it's caused by downtown Olympia, which clearly we couldn't do anything about, even if they're doing something down there. But I think a lot of it is caused by the old standards, not what we do now.
Agreed, but new stuff would have to come up to the new standards, which is so.
Not to be contrary here, but I think that the SMP is really not the best place to try to have stormwater controls. I mean, most of that is done through the NPDES permitting and through the drainage design and erosion control manuals and the Washington State Department of Transportation manual and the APWA manual and all that kind of stuff. And I think if we try to use SMP to force issues on all those other things, it's not going to work, and it's going to create a lot of headaches, and we wouldn't get anywhere with it anyways.
Need to start somewhere.
Okay. I'm gonna move on unless the Planning Commission wants to. Okay, gonna move on. Number 25, I'll just address it because I looked at that. The document does allow for an administrative SDP, and Yeah, I agree with you that if we don't have a definition, that there's one, much like we talked about for the letter of exemption, I think all the permit types should be defined. And I think they are in 19500, but you know, they could certainly be defined in the definition section where everyone's going to go to look. So we do allow, and I'm not, so maybe that was an older comment, but we do allow for an administrative SDP. And yeah, I think that whole section about permitting is going to be refined a little bit before the next draft, just to make sure it completely makes sense with our existing permit system, because we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, and to make sure that it makes sense to the folks who will implement this piece.
My main concern with this is we talk about a type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, so
Mhm.
forth. We define them very specifically. And I had to write SDP and CUP by the appropriate one because they weren't defined later.
Mhm.
What was an SDP? So for the consumer, they need to know which is which and not have to do an inference.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I will double back. I think that's a good note to double back and just make sure that the permits themselves are in the definition section, because we do refer to them throughout the document, and it may not be intuitive for someone to say, I need to go back to 19500. No, let's send them back to the section that has all the definitions as well. Okay, great. Other items on this page here. 26 to 35 are on this page 3 here.
I think we pretty much taken care of the rest of them in discussions as we went through.
Andrew, there's a 32.5, and that was the one that deals with fallow and agricultural land.
Mm-hmm.
I proposed at one time that we just remove a portion of that number 4 statement, and that in order to allow the land to lay fallow, just take it out, see what does that look like?
Yeah. Yep. And I'm working on some things for that. Yeah, for some potential options to address planning commission concerns. So I don't have that tonight, but absolutely point taken. Yes.
And I do have one other question. If the suspension does occur, and what does it resort to? What does the classification resort to, and how does it get returned to agricultural land?
So if someone stops farming it, it could go to any number of things, right? It could just be that it is left alone and left to just grow as nature will do it, or it's because someone's converted it to some other use and they're doing something else on it now. And it would return to agriculture at the time that someone wants to actively start farming that again, or do some sort of agricultural activity on that property.
No, what I really meant was, if it's considered abandoned according to this kind of a definition, what does the status resort to?
What do you mean status?
Well, it's not agricultural land anymore if it's taken out of the ag area. So what does it become?
I'm not sure what we would call that, because agricultural land that is being used for agriculture, could be technically classified any number of things. If you look at like the way that land use is coded, it doesn't necessarily have to be that not all land that is farmed is in current use. For example, current use are categories of land use that are they're getting a tax break essentially for farming or for doing some other type of beneficial activity on the property, and that is a classification. But you could have a farm out there that it's not necessarily enrolled in that current use. It's considered undeveloped land, or it could be residential land. It could be considered that under the coding system. But so I think it depends. It just depends on how it was already classified. It would stay what it was, as far as I know.
I thought that we had decided that ag land will always be ag land unless it's specifically converted to another use. And it doesn't matter why it's not being farmed or if it's being farmed or anything else. It will always be ag land unless specifically converted.
Yeah, I'm trying to find my notes. I think I took down some homework from that last meeting to go back and look at those things, but that sounds familiar.
That's the way I remember it.
So just the fact that it's deemed to be abandoned, it's still agricultural land.
I don't think you can abandon or I don't think you can, we want it so you can abandon agricultural land. Just because you're not using it doesn't mean it's abandoned. It's still always going to be, its baseline will always be agricultural land unless it's specifically converted.
And I guess that's my point. If it's agricultural land, it's not abandoned. It's just not being used.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking into. Yeah,
That's the intent that I would like.
yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. Unless converted, right? Okay, great. Because if it is developed, I mean, that's the end of that. It's the end of, traditional agricultural uses anyway. Okay, so going back to this page 3, Commissioner Carbon, I heard you say that your questions or comments on these were addressed. I'll pause for a moment to see if there's anything else on this page anyone else wants to address. Otherwise, I will scroll down to page 4. And
The only other thing is I still don't understand why men only get 1 sink and ladies get 2 sinks. It should be the same.
I have no idea where that came from. It might have been from some international building code somewhere, but I could.
Is the theory that 50% of the men don't wash their hands? Or
I have no idea. I know I wash mine a lot more these days, but I don't know. So that's something that we could look at.
I'd rather see 2 sinks in both men's and women's. So
But
encourage
it's just-
people to wash their hands.
You're saying that half the men wash their hands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't I just look into that and we'll keep moving. All right. Then I'm going to go to page 4, which I think there were some on this page that have been, since you wrote this, have been addressed. Let me see, largely numbers 37 through 44. Well, then shoot, a lot of the stuff on this page, a lot of it's pending. The public hearing option in number 37, I think you guys gave your recommendation on that last time, or at a meeting in December. Same with number 38. I took your recommendations on that. Number 39, struck that option. We did not resolve the covered moorage piece. I'm not sure that's something you want to get into right now, but that's as part of this comment here, number 39. I specifically remember that there was not a consensus on whether to make any change to the document. So maybe yeah. Number 40, I did that. And then 41 through 44, those all deal with, dimensional standards for mooring structures. And where you left me last time was to go back and look at the state requirements. And if there's no qualms with simply just referring to this, what the state's going to require, just use that. So that's what I'm working on. Okay, great. So number 45 or anything on page 5. Number 45 and number 46, my notes here are that the draft currently reads as planning commission requested prior to hearing. So unless there was a desire from planning commission to reopen those pieces, that was what my brief research uncovered. So does anyone see anything on this page here that they would like to address? We can also scroll. There's just a few here at the bottom.
Number 50, it's just back on the native vegetation again.
Yeah.
Appendix B2, we talked about that. Taking care of 51.
Yeah, number 50, I made a note that same as what we talked about, to potentially, yes, we can explore circumstances for non-native vegetation if Planning Commission wants to do that. So yeah, that can be part of that other conversation. Yep, 51 was done. That's right.
52 we've talked about.
Okay.
So I got to figure out what I meant by 53.
That was my note too. So those are standards for mitigation standards for, I believe, replacing a shoreline armoring or overwater structure, perhaps, and wanted to know from you, yeah, specifically if there were instances, what was confusing or what was potentially going to be misunderstood, and is there some tweaking we can do in there?
Yeah, so I think those will all come out in the final draft.
Okay. Is there anything else on this page that folks want to look at? Otherwise, that would be all that I have prepared for you this evening. Okay.
Thanks, Andrew. Great job.
Thank you. All right. I will stop sharing and turn you back to your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're off to staff updates.
Good evening, commissioners. For the record, Christina Chapeau, interim planning manager. I do have a few staff updates. First one is regarding leaving our virtual platform and coming into the office. So we did receive guidance from Dr. Abdamalik as the Thurston County Health Officer that has highly encouraged, and our director and county manager are asking everybody as staff who can telecommute to telecommute, in all meetings that can be virtual or remain virtual. So I would like to let the Planning Commission discuss this, but we would like to continue on in a virtual capacity and not bring in an in-person piece. We could revisit it again at the end of the month, or excuse me, in February, or at the end of February once we see the data that comes through with this new wave of Omicron. The second thing I have is the docket briefing will begin January 12th. So the county has received several new items to place on the docket, as well as some items that were on the preliminary docket. So this year is the resetting our docket. So everything will go on the docket, the things that we are currently working on, things that were on the preliminary docket that didn't make the current work docket, and then everything new that we received in as of November 15th of 2021. It is a big preliminary docket so that the board will go through. Our first briefing with the board is January 12th. That is to ask them to set the public comment period for that preliminary docket, and then we will go back to the board once we receive those comments to go through those comments, and then ask the board to place items on the docket, remove items off the docket, and then prioritize that work for us. So come March, we will have a work plan that looks a little bit different than what we're currently working on now. The The last thing I have is that it is January. January does typically mean that we start preparing for your elections for chair and vice chair. At this meeting, we usually ask for a couple of volunteers amongst those that are here today to go ahead and poll your fellow PC members to see if they have a willingness to be nominated for chair or vice chair, and to bring that information back to the next Planning Commission meeting, which would be January 19th. So we are looking for a couple of volunteers for a mini subcommittee, nomination subcommittee.
Well, I've done it the last 2 years, so I'll jump in there as one of them.
Okay.
I think I did it last year, so I'll help you, Doug.
Okay. I was going to say, we have so few members anymore. It's a pretty easy job. So in line with that, we need to know who is who, and I have phone numbers for a lot of people who are no longer on the committee, but in line with Kevin's question early on, I was just looking at membership roster that I had when I first joined, and I see, Don, did you get renewed? Because it looks like here your term expired 12/31/21. So
And I honestly can't answer that. I submitted an application for it on the 29th of November, but I've really heard
haven't
nothing.
heard. So Christina, maybe you could check on some of that, because I also see where, let's see, who else? I mean, my notes say Jim expired 6/16/21, but that's obviously got to be incorrect.
I've gone and I've been reappointed.
Yeah.
For a full 6?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or until you guys throw me out.
27, huh? You go clear out to 27.
If I live that long.
Eric's through this next year. So I guess I need to have confirmation as to who is who and get their phone numbers. So Scott,
Yeah.
You know, I understand what you're saying, Doug, but I think out of this group that's on the screens are the ones we're going to go through. If anybody new comes along, they're not going to be, they shouldn't be appointed to the chair if they come new, is my opinion. So it's going to come out of one of the 6 of us that are here.
Okay, so the 5 that we can see and the 1 that we can't.
Yes.
I don't know where the BOCC is in the process of filling those other vacancies at this point, but from what I've seen, they haven't even had any discussions on it yet. They haven't even looked over the applications yet, at least not during an agenda setting meeting or a commissioners meeting. So it might, even though they plan on doing something the first part of the year, it might be a while before we get those other 2 members. So wait for them.
I'm sorry, Eric, but we're actually 3 down.
Well, I guess I'm assuming Dawn's going to get reappointed, but I guess I don't know that.
No, we're still a nine member group. We're only 6 of us here.
And what is Dawn's status? I mean, what
is Raul no longer part of the Planning Commission?
That is correct. We did receive a resignation letter from Commissioner De Leon at the end of December. So this commission does have 3 vacancies. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
I should have started with that.
So according to bylaws, what would Dawn's status be right now?
At this point, looking at so Dawn is expired. I have to check to see if the commissioners have done a reappointment. Unfortunately, I was out the last 2 weeks of December and in meetings most of Tuesday, so I wasn't able to review the boards, and I haven't received any information, but technically at this point in time, Dawn would be expired.
Dawn's
So
position would be expired.
Yes, Dawn's position would be expired. I am so sorry, Dawn.
Thank you.
Yes, the position in which he had been appointed to.
Okay, so I guess we need to figure that out before the next meeting, otherwise we don't even have a quorum. Am I thinking right?
You'd still just have a quorum.
You'll still have a quorum. It'll just be a reduced number.
Okay,
Well, we always have a quorum
Yes.
okay,
because the way our bylaws are set up is a quorum is the majority of appointed members.
Yes.
Has nothing to do with the 9.
okay.
It's
thank
just
you.
when we have 9, 5 is the quorum. We need, doesn't matter if there's only 5 of us at a meeting, we need 5 to make a vote.
Yep.
If we're down to 5 members, then 3 is a quorum.
Got
Yes.
it. Thank you.
Yes, it's when you start getting into even numbers that it makes things a little difficult with voting, because there could be a split vote.
So let's just hope we get this filled. We need to get some more people out here.
Yes.
So as I recall, in what Scott and I will be doing is finding out who's interested in serving as an officer and in what position, and if so or if not, who would they nominate for those offices? And the third question was, do you have any suggestions or ideas for changes or to what we're doing?
Right.
I don't mean the specific work, but I mean how we function, that kind of thing. Maybe Christine, you could send us that again. I don't know that I still have that.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
I'll get it to
And-
Pauline. She can send it out.
Sure. And I think I have all the phone numbers for everybody except Kevin. So if you could, and then I could send that off to Scott in case he doesn't have it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'll need that.
Probably be able to provide that information as well.
And thank you guys for stepping up.
The last thing I have is that I did check the comment that Phyllis made this earlier today regarding the agenda. The agenda was posted on the Planning Commission's page. It's posted the Wednesday before, and it does include the link, the Zoom link for the public. I will say that if people save the page, once they search for it, if they don't refresh their cache, they may get an old page that pulls up. That's just how our browsers work these days. And that's all I have for staff updates.
Okay, thanks, Christina.
I have a
Bill.
question on that if I can. Christina, we have 2 staff members that are interim. Do you know if there's any plans to have them, you and Andy, lose the interim spot yet? And just do like regular full-time position kind of thing?
Make permanent. So
Permanent.
the the planning manager's position closed Monday. So the director will be holding interviews. He has informed me that he hopes to have a permanent person in that place by the end of February. So it will take some time. Andy is backfilling for Brad, who had been out due to medical reasons. Brad will be working his way back into his full-time position. However, Maya will be going out on maternity leave. So Andy will be, I have asked for Andy's interim position to be extended since we are short-staffed from the senior position. So we hope to have that continue on for at least until Maya gets back and we have a permanent manager. We did also have an associate planner position close Monday as well, so we will be backfilling Shannon Shula's position and hopefully be able to get more stuff to you besides the Shoreline Master Program.
Any other questions or thoughts? Thanks, Christina. So we're off to calendars now for attendance. Is there anybody that will be unable to attend the 19th, January 19th? And the next meeting after that will be February 2nd. Everybody be able to make that? Oh, Scott, I see you coming up.
I'm a question mark on that one.
Okay. Okie doke. So if there's nothing else or no new business, we will be adjourned. Thanks, guys.
Good night, all.
Everyone.